What's up, everybody? It's the Roundtable Sports Podcast. My name is Taylor McLean, and it's been another action-packed week of football. Taking it to the face yesterday, and it felt great being able to watch a bunch of games in the first window, then a high-quality game in the second window with a couple of peripheral games, and of course the Cowboys and Eagles to end it up, even though that game didn't go quite the way I wanted. It was just great to have that much football going on and that much quality football played, even though overall the quality of football has been down, it feels like, and we haven't been getting quite the same amount of offensive gameplay so far. It's just how the league goes. It ebbs and flows. And right now we've got some really strong defenses and some really strong defensive game plans that are stopping a lot of these high-powered offenses. And a lot of the offenses are set up in the same way. So you've had a lot of teams load up on that type of defense. And now the teams that have zagged against that, the teams that can run the ball rather than relying on their explosive passing, are having an easier time because they're zigging when everybody else is zagging, and all the defenses are set up to rush the passer on third down. That's kind of what the big game for the second window, the Bills versus Chiefs game, kind of antithesizes right there. Is everybody's trying to load up to beat these two teams, because I believe these two are the best two teams at this time and possibly later. We don't know what any of these teams are going to look like later on. And I keep telling everybody, hey, everything's all well and good right now, but it matters who's healthy when it comes playoff time. So there's still a lot to figure out here, but it was awesome to get to see the Bills play the Chiefs at this point so we can get a feel for where both of these teams are at this. And the Buffalo Bills have been loading up to beat the Chiefs ever since their first matchup in the playoffs. And of course, last year didn't do anything to dissuade that momentum towards trying to beat the Chiefs. They've been building up that defensive line and that pass rush with picks after pick, Ed Oliver with AJ Epinesa and others. And then finally they bring in the big piece over the top. They bring in Von Miller for $20 million. The Cowboys offered him $15 million. He's like, nah, I'm going to get this 20 because I'm Von Miller. And so far, so good. He's been able to put that type of game on game film here by beating up on different contenders, offensive linemen. I think a lot of us had high hopes for the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line that has underwhelmed to this point. I don't think that Orlando Brown is a true number one tackle, left tackle, as it were. And then Wiley on the other side, he's okay, but he's susceptible to being beat as well. And Von Miller got after him pretty well. It wasn't just him. Like I said, there was other holes. Tooney got hurt during the game, and while he managed to stay in at the time, still it's just something to note when you're thinking about the Chiefs and their overall prospects. And this is definitely what the Bills have been working towards, is being ready to do these things when it came time, whether it's rush Patrick or being able to spy him like they did at times with Milano. And of course, this game could have gone either which way. It came down to the final couple of possessions, and the Bills ended up getting the job done. Josh had an easier time creating time and made some big throws, not just in the final stretch, but down the final stretch and throughout the game. He made some really big throws and ran a good deal, but was smart about putting his body on the line too much. I mean, don't get me wrong. If he had to put his head down, he would. But I've noticed over the years that Josh has gotten smarter and smarter about putting himself on the line, especially in the regular season. But there's this effort mode. There's this, I'm getting this yard and you're going to have to stop me no matter what mode that Josh can get into. And he had a little bit of that going, but he didn't have to tap into it as much. It was more him creating a little bit more time and making some really big throws. It was tough because had Isaiah McKenzie had a bigger game, then they could have probably broken this out to a bigger lead, and it might not have come down to as close as it was. I love Isaiah McKenzie, and he's especially valuable in like a salary cap dynasty league where he's $1.5 million, but he made some bad plays. There was the fumble. He stumbled in the end zone and he had a bad drop all in the first half and didn't seem to get going after that. So that hurt them a lot. But luckily, they were able to rely on Gabriel Davis and Stephon Diggs. And when you have a Stephon Diggs type guy, a number one guy that can make the type of catches he's capable of making, and then you have that guy on the other side in Gabriel Davis, that can make you extremely dangerous because it's a pick your poison type situation on which way the defense wants to lean, because they want to lean towards Diggs, but they have to respect Davis as well. And with you playing a bunch of two deep safety, and that's the defensive game plan that we're seeing a lot against these high flying teams, is daring them to run the ball and playing these safeties where they are 10, 15 yards away from the line of scrimmage. That's covering up a lot of these deep passes and begging these teams to have long sustained drives. And the defense is betting that you're going to hold, or that they're going to be able to stop you with their linebackers and their defensive line in the case of the Bills. And both teams had opportunities to run. It's just Kansas City wasn't able to take advantage as much. And the Bills did a better job of being able to hold up with their front against the run than Kansas City did overall. Not that Kansas City did a bad job necessarily either, but it seemed like the rushing lanes were a little bit more open. But in the end, it came down to big plays being made by Josh, not just the passes. He had the hurdle as well on that final drive, but he did make really big time plays and passes. And it's not like Patrick wasn't in there doing it as well, but without the top flight weapons to get over the top, and with Kelce getting pretty well covered for Travis Kelce. I mean, he still had 8 receptions for over 100 yards, but still they did a decent job of keeping Patrick away from him in those tighter moments, and then forced those other guys to beat them. Juju made a couple of big plays, but they really do miss having that number one guy on the outside to threaten the defense overall. And we knew they were going to, but in the end, when the margins on this game are so thin, and we're talking about a situation that came down to the last couple of drives, it felt like having that guy would have made a huge difference. And Mecole and Marquez Valdez-Scantling do a decent facsimile, but it's just not quite the same overall. Still, Patrick was up 3 with the ball in his hands, and they get a couple of first downs going down the field, and this game could have turned out a lot differently. So once again, it'll be all about health for these teams going forward and who's on the field should they meet again. The good thing for these teams is I definitely like both these teams going forward, and I think they are definitely a part of the championship ring of trust, if you will. Like, what teams do you honestly think can win the championship? Well, obviously the Bills are probably the favorite, and I still consider Kansas City a part of that situation. The thing is, all the teams have been gearing up to beat this team, and there is a game plan out there right now that everybody's trying to execute to force the Kansas City Chiefs and force the Buffalo Bills to do things they don't necessarily excel at when it comes to running the ball and having to sustain long drives. Both of them like to have more explosive plays and get more yards in chunks, but this is what the NFL is. You have to have a curveball in addition to your fastball, because some teams are going to be able to take away what you like to do. And in both of these teams' instances, they have a pretty decent curveball as well. Seems like the Bills maybe more than the Kansas City Chiefs, right? But that's what's happening to teams and quarterbacks like Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson. When teams are able to take those edges away from them and force them to be a pocket passer, or the game script calls for them to do so, then that's when they're running into trouble, because they've got the running part down and they can throw when the situation is a plus situation, but can they throw when the chips are down? like when Patrick gets the ball back with 1 minute left, the other team believes that they could possibly still be in trouble. You don't feel that same way. You don't feel that same sense of dread when the lesser quarterbacks are in there. Like you feel it with Joe Burrow, you feel it with Herbert, you feel it with these upper level guys, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. You just believe that they can lead that drive. I include Josh Allen and Patrick, obviously, in that conversation as well. That's what all these other teams are striving for, is to have that guy that intimidates the other team. Not that that does anything, but that means that you have that chance every time to win those games, especially when it comes down to the final couple of plays. You know, Von Miller isn't healthy come the conference championship, and he's not there to make that sack at the on that third down to get Buffalo back the ball, then, you know, this game goes a lot differently. So that's what it'll come down to. But the Bills definitely showed that they're the alpha right now at this time. And really, not that Kansas City didn't make mistakes, but Buffalo felt like they left a little bit more on the field than Kansas City did at this point. So it definitely was a strong statement for Buffalo to come into Kansas City and do what they did here. Now they got a bye week to kind of gather themselves and go into the rest of the season. A lot of strong teams on bye weeks next week. Bills, Rams, Rams, whatever, but Vikings and Eagles all on bye weeks next week. So start thinking about that as well if you're listening now, because you're going to have to make some moves probably with that many strong fantasy players out there on those teams. The next game that I watched was the New England Patriots 38-15 victory over the Cleveland Browns. And you may say to yourself, or have it already clicked off of the podcast at this point if you're on YouTube, because it's not exactly a sexy game, but I had to kind of see what Bailey Zappi did in this game to really try and harden my opinions on him and Jacoby Brissett in the same breath. I kind of wanted to see how this game went down, and I just have opinions about these teams going forward, and I think both these teams will matter in the end here. So I think it's important to get a feel for them right now. And first, I want to talk about the Patriots, of course. And really, the big thing for me was the Zappi part of it, because he did play well. The stats bear it out, and the film bears it out as well. The good thing about the Patriots is they do a great job of managing their quarterback and playing to his strengths. They are really good at that part of the game and setting up a quarterback for success when it comes to getting him on schedule, really open throws. The Patriots did a really good job of committing to the run in a situation where it was really hard to run, and the Cleveland Browns really sold out to stop the run. But to their credit, they stuck with it throughout the game, and that allowed them to take some pressure off of Zappi and then allow him to work open throws off of the play action and not play action. He made some big throws without it as well. I don't think that he possesses upper level tools. The arm strength, I don't think that, you know, if you're talking baseball mile per hour, because football mile per hour isn't a big deal, but if you're talking about what he's throwing, he's probably throwing like 91. If Justin Herbert and Josh Allen are throwing in the hundreds, then that's what we're probably talking there. But once again, if you're on time and you're making smart decisions and hitting guys accurately with the football and giving them a chance to make plays on the football, then you can be a successful quarterback throwing 91, maybe even 92. It's not a negative arm. Like, I think Andy Dalton is a negative arm. I don't think Bailey Zappi is close to that. He's closer to that than he is close to having a rocket arm, but I think it's absolutely functional. And he's not a super negative in the pocket either. He showed the ability to move around a bit and to extend plays. But the Browns, other than a couple of Myles Garrett plays, which were big plays, the strip sack was big early on, and then the sack later on was big too. And it was good to see him back out there, although on the last sack, I worry that he hurt his arm a little bit. But still, the Patriots did a great job of managing Zappe and putting him in situations to succeed. But it wasn't just that. It was also that he was on time and he didn't make big mistakes. Even the strip sack was just really an incredible play by Garrett himself, which blindsided Zappe. There's really no way for him to be able to tell that that arm was coming in on him right there. So I definitely have to give Bailey Zappe credit. And while I don't know that he's better than Mac Jones is, and I don't think that he has the same upside as Mac Jones, it also doesn't feel like he's quite as reckless either. The Patriots may try to push things a little further than they would with Mac, kind of in the same way that the Cowboys have been using Cooper Rush and running their ball control offense. When it works and when you're able to run the play action and you get some open receivers, then that makes everything easier and makes the offense flow. When you're not able to do that, no matter who the quarterback is, they're going to struggle in a situation like that. The good thing for Zappe and the Patriots at this point is they've definitely rounded out their group of receivers now. The additions of Devontae Parker and Tyquan Thornton give them elements they didn't have previously. I like Nelson Aguilar fine, and he definitely would add something to this mix as well. But Tyquan Thornton gives them an extra level of speed and an extra level of gadget guy, which showed its head in the very end of the game where he got that jet sweep going the other way and scored the easy touchdown to really ice the game. Of course, they would score again with another Ramondre Stevenson touchdown, of which he had two. And that big play to not in the half, but near the end of half for Ramondre was huge and seemed to swing the momentum of the game at that time towards the Patriots. But to my point, having all of these weapons and having Devontae Parker be able to go over the top with his ability to go up and get the ball definitely feels like it rounds out the crew with Jonnu, with Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry made a beautiful play that I can't wait to make a video on from the coach's film angle where he leaves Grant Delpit in the dust with a nice inside cut. And then that's one of Bailey Zappe's big throws as he hits him right on time. Hunter Henry's able to go. It wasn't just then. There was other plays that he was able to make that really made this victory for the Patriots. And they're going to have an interesting decision. Not that I think that Bailey Zappe is better than Mac Jones, but Zappe has been giving them what they need at this point, but definitely have to go back to Mac and see where he's at and see what he gives you. You can always go back to Zappe at some point, but this also gives you the opportunity to allow Mac to fully heal now that you're 3-3 at this point. I think that New England would absolutely take that if you'd have given them the option at the time of the Mac injury. Now you've got the Bears, Jets, Colts, Jets to figure everything out before you get into the Vikings and Bills and Cardinals. That's a little meatier as far as your schedule goes. Even though the Jets have played a lot better, I think that the Patriots have the type of defense and the type of defensive coaching that could possibly give Zach Wilson some trouble. We'll see what happens in both those matchups. That should be interesting for sure. Also, just note that Ramondre played 86% of the snaps in this game. Without Damian Harris in there, he's going to get the bulk of the snaps. And it doesn't seem like Damian Harris is too badly hurt, and he'll probably be back in the mix here pretty shortly. And I think he is a quality running back. I really do like Damian Harris a lot, but they seem to like Ramondre, and I like Ramondre a lot too. They have him under contract for longer. Damian's going to be a free agent after the season. So they're going to use Damian and get what they can out of him before they let him loose, because they don't strike me as the type of team to pay a running back, but they might. I mean, they make a solid 1-2 punch, and I really like what they both bring to the table. And for a team that runs as much as the Patriots run, I think it's smart to have both of them. But you're paying him $5 million a year. That's one thing. If you're having to pay him like 7, 8, 9, 10, like, some of the free agent running backs can get up to, then that may be another thing. I don't know that Damian is worth all of that, but a team desperate at running back may give him that because he is a quality running back. Granted, he's been running behind a pretty good offensive line at this point, but we'll see what happens when he gets back in the mix. Until then, I really like Ramondre, and he has lots of bursts, the ability to catch the ball and allow them to pretty much do whatever they need to do offensively, plus the ability to break the big run as well with not super Tyreek speed or anything, but good running back speed. I think he has the ability to continue doing what he's doing. On the Cleveland side, I thought it was interesting that this was week 6 and it felt like Jacoby Brissett had kind of run out of gas at this point. The week 6 thing, that they say that the rule of thumb for defensive coordinators to get a good feel for what you have going on offense is 6 game tapes. And it's totally realistic to watch 6 game tapes on the team that you're about to play. So once an offensive coordinator has seen that much film on what you're doing in a season, then they have the ability to game plan you pretty seriously at that point. So they can take away what you like to do and what you're capable of doing and say, okay, beat me this way. Because you can take away certain parts of the field. Like you can take away all the short stuff and say, okay, beat me long. Have one safety in the back and have everybody else up in the box and tell the quarterback to beat you at that point. Sometimes they're capable of doing it, sometimes they're not. And for these quarterbacks and for these teams, you need to be able to do other things at that point. So if they say, okay, we're going to take away the running game, or we're going to take away the short passing, or whatever it is, we're going to take away this receiver, or we're going to take away Nick Chubb in this instance, then what are you going to do to force us to stop doing that? And if you don't have that counterpunch, in the same way we were talking about the Bills and Chiefs, if you can't run, if the other teams are going to say, hey, why not run the ball? We're going to play deep here, then you're going to struggle. And now that teams have a good feel for what the Jacoby Brissett-led Cleveland Browns are bringing us here, then it's a lot easier to stop it. It's a lot easier to game plan for it. And I think that the Patriots are pretty stout on defense and are pretty good at game planning and kind of expose Cleveland in a lot of ways here. Cleveland is in this game for what it's worth. They were down, and yeah, it was 2 possessions, but they muff a punt and then it's all the way over at that point. But still, you saw that Jacoby Brissett just doesn't have that pinpoint passing ability that when the Browns get down, he's going to have the ability to throw them back into the game. This is the plight of all backups, because typically you become a backup because you have some flaw in your game that can be exploited, and bringing them into a game unexpectedly. Okay, great. Then you can't game plan for that on the fly typically as much. And then they end up doing a whole lot better, right? Well, when you have 6 weeks of tape on them and can game plan for them and take away that one thing or that couple of things that they're good at, then they struggle in those all those areas they always struggle in again at that point, and you end up where you end up at this point with 2-4. And there's a bunch of games left that this has to work for the Cleveland Browns to be in the mix for the playoffs for when they get Deshaun Watson back. I mean, he's still got to tread water for another 5 games here, and the book's already out here, and it's Ravens, Bengals, Dolphins, Bills, Buccaneers. That is a murderous row of games, especially when we should have Tua back in full form for the Dolphins. And then it's Texans, Bengals, Ravens after that. Texans should be, tanking, but Bengals, Ravens should be fighting for the playoffs at that point. So this is not a good situation, my point being, for the Cleveland Browns to be in at this time. They needed to get as many of these first couple of games as they possibly could. And while they were competitive in all of these games, it just wasn't quite enough. And then they lose Teller. And if you downgrade this line at any point, that's going to lead to struggles as well. And you could tell that there was a lot of frustration on the faces of the wide receivers for the Browns when Jacoby was having to try and throw them into the game. But that's what it is. That's why these backups are what they are. And that's why you will only want to have limited exposure with them. Unfortunately, Cleveland traded themselves into this situation. And really, it's probably about other years for them anyway. But I had hopes that maybe they might pull this off, and maybe they still will. It's not like they can't win some of those games, and the Steelers, Commanders, Saints on the end of their schedule are definitely winnable. But man, they needed the Falcons and Chargers and Patriots games right here, and the Jets. They lost some games that they needed to win to put themselves in a situation to succeed. And who knows, maybe they can beat the Bengals and Ravens with Deshaun too. But I just have some questions for them, and I just think we've seen all we need to see from Jacoby at this point. I probably won't be watching them as fervently as I might have until we see Deshaun again, which I'm excited to see, but it's going to be a while. And then finally, for the purposes of this podcast, I'm certainly going to watch more games than this. I thought we'd go over the Cowboys loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. I know that people would love to bathe themselves in the tears of every Cowboys fan, and they think that would sustain them and make them young forever, which, you know what, very well may be the case. Maybe that's what all the Hollywood stars have figured out, that Cowboys fans' tears make you young. But it does seem like everybody enjoys that in the same way that people enjoy hating the Yankees or any other big franchise. Really, as a Cowboys fan, I can speak to the fact that most of us feel like we're playing with house money at this point, that the fact that we got to rest Dak as long as we did to be able to recover from his injury is a blessing, and that we saw things from this team during that time that make us feel pretty good as far as where this team could go going forward, especially with the fact that Tyron Smith's been out to this point, the fact that Tyler Smith has played as well as he has, despite, not having as good a game tonight. None of the offensive line did exactly, but the fact that that's gone as well as it has meant everything to this whole situation. Zeke playing as well as he has, the defense, showing out as the personality of this team, and Micah kind of making himself the number one Cowboy in a lot of people's minds has really been great. So the fact that we've gotten to this point before getting spanked by a team is encouraging for everybody. And even though everything went wrong, especially in the very first part of this game for the Cowboys, the fact that they were able to make it close, the fact that they didn't quit and were able to bring this game back into, make everybody in Philadelphia sweat a little bit, speaks a lot to this team and its chances going forward, because even though they lost this game, these teams might not be the teams that meet even later on in the regular season, much less in the playoffs if they do meet. So a lot of attrition, a lot of injuries could happen between now and then, and we'll need to see how those things play themselves out until then. That's not to make excuses. This was still very disheartening to have the long drive to start the game, the interception, that was tipped up into the air after that, and then the non-review call to shake everybody's faith in Mike McCarthy a little bit, just to add on to everything, definitely is a nightmare for what Cowboys fans were expecting to start that game. Like I said, not that I had the expectations to beat Philadelphia, but not to just have everything piled on and be down a quick 17 was very disheartening. And Philadelphia definitely showed some things that should have showed everyone why they are the preeminent threat at this time in the NFC. Their offensive line was moving the Cowboys around pretty good, and having Mailata along with the rest of their line healthy certainly makes a difference for any team, but especially for the Philadelphia Eagles. Them having the ability to run the ball and make moves like that really feeds the rest of their offense, and really hurt the Cowboys overall that they had to play into that so that they couldn't put more pressure on Jalen Hurts to have to throw the ball and be more of a pocket passer. He did a great job of getting out of the pocket and causing the Cowboys problems. It makes them a very hard matchup for the Cowboys when they can't get home to him on as many sacks, because he's able to get away and actually able to get yards on some of those plays because he is so fast and mobile. And he got sacked, and the Cowboys got home on him a couple of times, but it seemed like more often than not that he was able to create more time, or just get away to throw the ball away and live another day. And then he made some big throws. Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, all of those things make them extremely dangerous. Although if I see Dallas Goedert call for a flag and get it again because someone was talking trash to him, I may just blanket never draft him again in fantasy and be off of him forever, because that was pretty. I mean, the referees gave it to him, so that's kind of on them. But still, it was pretty gross to watch that in action. I thought Trayvon definitely earned his little tantrum situation, but it didn't feel like Micah had earned his, not knowing what he said. I guess he could have said something pretty horrible. He seemed to be pretty frustrated in the game, and rightfully so. The Eagles did a masterful job of taking him out of plays and frustrating him at times, because they made him and other Cowboys at times the read and didn't even have to block him. And then, if he crashes down on the running back, Jalen could pull it and run. Or a couple of times on the goal line, they gave him the option to either run the ball in himself or throw it over the top. And both times he was able to throw it over the top and hit a guy in the end zone. It's not something that we had seen done to the Cowboys to this point. And that's kind of what happens in the scope of an NFL season, is people come up with ideas on how to frustrate you and how to take away the things that you like to do. And then you have to come up with a counter to that. So I'm guessing that the Cowboys will see more of what the Eagles did to them in the future. And that can happen on both sides. A defense gives up a whole bunch of plays to an offense like this, and then they end up seeing those plays over and over again. Or like what we're seeing, what we've been talking about with Kansas City and with Buffalo, and with the deep safeties and everything, that happens to everybody. And then all of a sudden, teams that are set up to run the ball are getting over on those teams because they're set up to stop the pass, not the run. It's just a whole pendulum swing one way or another. And you have to be able to ebb and flow with other teams' game plans that come up throughout the season, and with the injuries that come up for your team. And the fact that the Cowboys made it as far as they did and are even 4-2, keeping themselves in the mix for one of the higher seeds, that's a big deal overall. But in the end, Philadelphia definitely showed you why they're the preeminent team right now in the NFC. They did lose Lane Johnson late in the game, so that could be a problem going forward. They need him to fill out the line, and part of having an offensive line that works is not having any one guy that is really bad. So losing guys off of your top, maybe they have a good backup, right? But the more guys that go out, the more, your depth is counted on. And if you get a Waldo in your lineup, then that can really turn things on its head. Still, to see the Eagles outfox the Cowboys definitely should make them feel good. I don't know that everybody's quaking in their boots in the NFL or anything, especially after Buffalo handled Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. But if they can stay healthy, they have just as good a shot as anybody. And if Jalen can continue to take the strides he's taken to this point, he's shown a lot of maturity, and he still may never be a classic pocket passer at all. But for teams that are built around the rush like the Cowboys are, he's especially effective and definitely gave them big time problems in this game. Once again, it's about staying healthy to the end. And, who knows? The Cowboys kept this close. Dak Prescott could have made this a different game. At the very least, I hope that this kind of will give Cowboys fans that were talking about Cooper Rush remaining the starter even when Dak Prescott is healthy. At least this might have given them a dose of reality on what he truly is as a quarterback. Game manager, fine. Not pushing himself too far, fine. But you see that with the limits on what he can do down the field and as a passer overall, that he is a good backup, but which is way more than I expected, but he's not an NFL every week guy like Dak Prescott can be. And, with the identity that the Cowboys have found to this point, hopefully Dak can step into that identity and push it to its outer limits and push the Cowboys offense to a place that it can be supported by the defense. Because once the Philadelphia gets up, that also doesn't play into the Cowboys' hands in that they need to be rushing the passer and put into situations where they have plus rushing type situations where they can put Fowler in, where they can have Dorrance and D-Law and Micah rushing the passer and really going at it and play coverage outside of that. That's when everything's going right for the Cowboys. And with everything that went wrong up front, that just wasn't in the cards. It was always going to be a comeback situation. To their credit, they never quit, but expecting Cooper Rush to throw you back into a game just wasn't something that was going to happen in this game or going forward. Likely, he's just not that guy. It's okay. That's not what most backups are, not that guy. The fact that he's already gotten the Cowboys to the wins that they've gotten is incredible, when I thought the Cowboys season was over when Dak got hurt. So that's how much he's beat the expectations that I had for him to this point. So to bemoan him now because he had an off game against a defense that's really solid, that adding James Bradbury and Chauncey Gardner to this mix with Slay makes them very dangerous. That's they're tough. They're tough in coverage, and then they've got rushers on the front that they've been building up for years. Whether Brandon Graham can stay healthy at this point in his career is questionable. But when you add Jordan Davis to the mix they already had, that makes them tough up front too. So they've done a lot of good things personnel-wise in this last little bit. And this was a statement to that fact that they did what they did to the Cowboys, a team that, even though they still didn't have Dak Prescott, I had expectations for this game. And they came back and met them once they kind of settled down. But the fact that it went as poorly as it did definitely didn't fill me with hope either that they will beat them in the next game either, because they're able to stay healthy right now. They're the superior team to the Cowboys. They have more overall talent. The question is Dak versus Jalen. We didn't get to see that tonight, and we'll hopefully get to see it next time. Normally, I'd probably go to a fourth game, but I thought there was something else interesting that happened today. First, Robbie Anderson had a blow up on the sideline and has now been traded to the Arizona Cardinals for a 6th and 7th pick. The Cardinals may have lost Hollywood Brown for the year at this point. That came out while I was recording that he's possibly out for the year. They haven't definitively said yet, and there's plenty of games between now and then, so definitely count him out. So picking up Robbie Anderson and bringing in DeAndre Hopkins coming up fresh off the suspension. I had questions on how is Hollywood and DeAndre going to look, and was that going to make the Cardinals dangerous? But seems like we're not going to get the chance to see that. And it's horrible timing for Hollywood with his 5th-year option coming up next year. I bet they take it on since they gave up a first-round pick for him, but just horrible timing for the Cardinals overall. And now teams can really key in on DeAndre Hopkins, who we don't know how he's going to look coming out, but at least they're adding Robbie, who has disappointed up until this point with, from what I expected from him coming off a solid first year with the Panthers, but really hasn't been able to build on that at all. It'll be interesting to see if the Panthers end up being a humongous tank situation. I mean, they already are, and they're going to be, but who will win when it comes to the tanking? Will it be Carolina? Will it be the Houston Texans? That was the big thing that I saw with the Texans as well, not to gloss over possibly losing Hollywood Brown. But the other big thing was that Houston Texans fired Jack Easterby and are moving on from him at this point. He was the last guy that was left from the old administration that had really brought them down and cratered them as a team. It was a real bummer to see him left on the board once everybody had kind of gone down. And now that they successfully traded Deshaun at possibly the perfect time, since everything went down with Deshaun Watson right after that, it feels like they're finally in a position to move forward and maybe reclimate themselves as a franchise. We still don't know exactly who's going to be in charge as far as the football operations. Hasn't been great up until this point as far as what they've done under their current ownership. So I don't know that I have a whole lot of faith in that, but they've been making better football moves since they brought in Nick Caserio. And I'm guessing that he's going to have a ton of sway without Easterby in there. Not saying I have a corporate depth chart in front of me, but I'm guessing having your boss fired and you're still around is something that's good. And they definitely need somebody at the helm drafting and to make them better at this point, because otherwise they're going to be in a bad way. They still need to find their guy as far as the quarterback goes, but they seem to be finding guys at other position and have made some good moves overall to this point, I think, as far as filling out the roster with, without going overboard and trying to put too much into these years, because there were just going to be some down years while you rebooted from what you had going on. And the Cleveland Browns haven't been playing all that well as well. You own their picks for the next 3 years. The play is probably going to pick up when Deshaun Watson gets back. But as we talked about earlier, got a pretty rough schedule going forward. And I don't know that there's going to be enough time for them to pull themselves out of the top half of the draft. So it's definitely a win for them. But they've got to hit these draft picks too. They got to hit more Dameon Pierce's, although he seems to be a special one. And I'm pretty happy to have him on my fantasy team. We'll just hope that the offense is able to move them along and move them along. But that's the thing. You have to hit draft picks in the NFL. You have to fill your roster with that talent and then re-sign that talent and then replace that talent that you can't re-sign with additional draft picks. Seems pretty rudimentary, but you notice that there are a lot of teams that don't do that and they perpetually end up at the bottom. But the main thing I think for the Texans is going to be the tank. So are they going to be able to race to the bottom with the Panthers? Panthers may have signaled a fire sale with the trade of Robbie Anderson, and the trade deadline is coming up. It's less than 2 weeks away. So all that needs to happen. Could just be a one-off thing with Robbie Anderson since he had a big blow up on the sideline and got sent to the locker room. But it'd be interesting to see if they trade DJ Moore, if they trade CMC and try to race to the bottom with Houston. I'm going to bring on one of my Houston Texans buddies next week if he has the time to talk about the tank and where we're at with that. We can kind of get a feel for who's going to be bad at this point, even though there's like a 1-4 team in the Raiders that I don't think is all that bad. But I think that the Panthers have kind of shown what they're going to show. They didn't really get a big bounce back from PJ Walker or showing that it wasn't them, it was the coach. Sometimes teams have those moments, or a season like the Raiders had a whole second half of the season after they got rid of Gruden last year. So that can happen, but it seems like the Panthers have had their last gasp in that moment. And we'll see if they trade CMC and trade DJ Moore. Those are their big, or even Brian Burns. Those are their big chips at this point. But I wanted to hit that news on the way out for sure. Maybe give a little buffer to the Cowboys there. I'm still hurting a little bit. If you've gotten to this point and haven't done so, go back and download the podcast if you haven't already. That's the big metric that counts to the podcast. Obviously, a like if you found this on YouTube. Sorry to the video situation. It's hard when you're by yourself on this to provide the video part of it, but definitely enjoy the audio either way. I'm going to have more thoughts this week. We had a really rough week last week. Didn't get to a second podcast, but we're definitely going to this week. Got a little bit more time on my hands. Appreciate the time today. Doing a little different, kind of did it in segments as the day went along and after each game. So hopefully that worked out. Appreciate your time today. Have a great rest of your day.